for our gathering over the next week or so, and I'll read them briefly. The legal voters of the Addison Central School District are hereby notified of the public information hearing on Tuesday, February 22nd, 2022, Tuesday, at 7 p.m. to discuss Australian ballot articles warned for vote on Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. Virtual connections are available on the district website. The warning signed by Linda Barrett, our clerk, and Mary Cullinane, our board chair. The warning further states that the annual report and budget book for fiscal year 23 are available on the district website or by requesting a copy through a call to the office. Secondly, a warning for the annual meeting, which is on March 1st. The legal voters of the Addison Central School District are hereby warned to meet at the following polling places on March 1st, 2022, to vote by Australian ballot on the following articles of business. Article 1, to see if the voters of the Addison Central School District will vote to authorize its board of directors under 16 VSA 562(9) to borrow money by issuance of bonds or notes not in excess of anticipated revenue for the school year. Article 2, shall the voters of the Addison Central School District vote to authorize the board to expend $41,578,089, which is the amount the board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. It's estimated that this proposed budget, if approved, will result in education spending of $20,076.16 per equalized pupil. The projected spending per equalized pupil is 6.1% higher than spending for the current year. Article 3, shall the voters of the Addison Central School District vote to authorize the board to appropriate $2,323,099, the 2021 unassigned fund balance, which is estimated to be that amount, to the Capital Reserve Fund. Article 4, to elect 5 school directors from the nominees to serve on the board for the following terms: 3 residents of Middlebury for a 3-year term, 1 Ripton resident for a 3-year term, and 1 Weybridge resident for a 3-year term. Article 5, to elect the following school district officers from the nominees for a 1-year term: moderator, treasurer, and clerk. The warning is also signed by our district clerk, Linda Barrett, and Mary Cullinane, our board chair. In just a few minutes, we'll talk about the articles that are on the ballot on March 1st. 3 of them relate to district finance, so I think it would make sense to consider them all together in our presentation and discussion tonight. And then we'll, at the end of the meeting or after the budget presentation and all the questions, invite those who are seeking election for the positions that are on the ballot to introduce themselves. Our process is a little different, as you know, from the norm. Traditionally, the officers are elected at this meeting by nomination from the floor, but during the pandemic, we've elected them by Australian ballot, and that's why I don't need to impose on Mary to conduct an election of a moderator tonight, because that was decided by the voters last March. So we'll proceed to a discussion in just a moment. Are there announcements before we get into the discussion of the budget?
Thank you, Governor. We do have 2 very important announcements. This year, we will be seeing 2 board members who will not be running for re-election, and we wanted to take the opportunity to publicly thank and recognize them for their work. Betty Tafunde has brought to our board a tremendous voice of the public. She has brought quiet leadership and has raised a perspective that this board was in desperate need of. And we at this time would like to, Betty, publicly thank you for your contributions, for the way in which you go about your contributions, and for the commitment that we know you will continue to have for this community that you so actively contribute to. And so on behalf of the board, Betty, thank you very much for your service.
You're welcome.
We also will be saying goodbye to Lorraine. And Lorraine brings a level of experience and dedication to this community that is unsurpassed. And we have a board member here who knows her incredibly well, who we thought it would be appropriate to provide him with the opportunity to give voice to our thanks. So Lorraine, with that, thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it over to Peter Conlon.
Thank you. Each year, we do say goodbye to members of the school board who step down from board service. But rarely do we have someone with so many years of service on so many boards. Lorraine Morris is probably unique among school board members, as she has almost always served on at least 2 school boards at one time. When I joined the UD3 board in 2005, Lorraine was there, splitting her time between UD3 and the Mary Hogan Elementary School Board. When we became a unified district a decade later, Lorraine again stepped up and to serve on the new ACSD board. But that was, of course, not enough for Lorraine, even though we had lots of more work on committees than we had previously. Lorraine volunteered to serve as one of ACSD's 2 delegates to the Hannaford Career Center Board and has been serving there ever since. During her years, Lorraine has taken some of the hardest assignments that one has serving on a school board. She has served on numerous negotiation sessions. Lorraine and I have been on 3 together for the ACSD board, and her counsel has always been incredibly valuable going through there.
And her cookies.
And her cookies. When I was elected chair of the ACSD board, Lorraine was elected vice chair. And again, having someone to bounce my thoughts off of, and especially somebody who sometimes, and perhaps sometimes often disagreed with me, was really critical to the discussions that we would later have on the board. So please join me in thanking a true public servant. Thank you, Lorraine, and we look forward to your continued involvement in our schools, though perhaps maybe take a month off. Thank you.
Well, Betty and Lorraine, thank you so much for your service to our district. And Lorraine even made enough cookies sometimes for those of us who attend only the annual meeting. I'm grateful for that along the way. On a somewhat less festive note, I feel compelled to note the passing this past week of someone who's been involved in our district for a long time, a gentleman who served on both the UD3 and Hannaford Center boards and served as moderator of both districts as well. Our good friend Dick Fodall. We'll certainly miss his contributions, but more importantly, we'll miss Dick as a great gentleman and friend to us all. Well, any other announcements before we dive into the budget? This is, I'm not a techie, as may become evident here soon, but this is a webinar. That's the official Zoom category of meeting. And we certainly want to invite questions and comments from voters in the district as we move along. And if you will raise your Zoom hand at the appropriate time, then we'll be able to recognize you and give you the floor. But to begin our discussion tonight, let me turn it over to Mary Cullinane, the chair of our board, for comments that she might like to offer at this point.
Thank you, Governor. And to first and foremost, to the district personnel and staff that have been working this past year under unprecedented constraints and challenges. Thank you for the work that has been done, the contributions that you tirelessly make, and your willingness to fundamentally do whatever it took to get us through this past year. And we recognize that the situation was not always what we wanted it to be, but it was the situation that we had to deal with. And that's what you did. And so on behalf of this board, we wanted to take the opportunity to publicly thank you for that. The budget that you have presented for us to approve is one that clearly puts students first. The amount of resources, the amount of dollars that are directly attributed to the people who are standing in front of our kids and with them on the playgrounds and next to them in the cafeterias shows that this district is fundamentally committed to putting students first. And so I want to thank you for that work as well. And with that, we will turn it over to Peter and take it from there. Peter?
Great, thank you. So I'm sorry I can't be there in person tonight. I miss being with all of you. I just want to start out by thanking the entire board, thank all of the leaders who are present here tonight. You'll see them in the attendees list, and thank our entire community. The last 2 years have been really, really challenging on so many fronts. We've seen our communities fray in places that we never imagined they would fray. And we have a lot of work to do as we go forward. So I just want to start out by thanking everyone. The biggest challenge we have as we go forward is figuring out how to use our combined resources to do what we need to do for our students. We know as we entered this budget cycle, again, in kind of like year 2/year 3, given that we think in school years, not in calendar years or months. And you know, we're both getting good at this in terms of we've acclimated in some ways. In other ways, as I talk to leaders across the country about what they're doing in their districts and how they're responding, I think everyone is still kind of searching for a way to really support the social and emotional needs of students, and you know, the 6 to 7 hours we have with students during the day and the needs they have 24 hours a day. So as we entered this budget cycle, the thing that's, you know, first and foremost for us is taking care of each other and taking care of students. And I think this budget, as Mary said, reflects that. The overall, you know, impact in terms of looking at the numbers in this budget, we've got a 5.2% increase, budget to budget. Most of that is salaries and benefits. Right now, there is, as we all know, a labor shortage right now. We are having a really challenging time filling positions. Some of our new agreements, we just finished negotiations recently, so we've got a higher than normal increase. This is happening across the board throughout Vermont. We finished a few months ago. People that are negotiating now, those numbers have increased. We were at around 4% for teachers, administrators, so both union and non-union are around 4% going into next year. Others now I think are more around 5% are some of the numbers I'm hearing from other districts. So those numbers and the impacts to school districts right now are increasing as the labor shortage continues. So that's something that we're kind of aware of, and we're looking at as we plan ahead, not for this budget cycle, but in future ones as well. We know that will be an impact. Mostly due to the flood of federal funding over the last year and a half, the state is somewhat flush and the ed fund is somewhat flush. So our tax impact, and this is based on the yield, and Logan, our business manager, will be sharing shortly some more detail, but I just wanted to give a high level overview. We've got a 9-cent decrease in our district tax rate. And after the combined level of appraisal, we're looking at about a 1 cent increase in tax rate down to a 10-cent decrease in tax rate. So the tax impact of this budget is either minimal or a savings. A couple of the other kind of key pieces that I just wanted to cover tonight. One thing is the fund balance. So last year we did use $500,000 in our ending fund balance to cover costs in the budget. And we've talked about this previously, that is a one-time thing. If that's something that you continue to do, you end up with essentially a cliff that you can't cover. And we did that last year to move below the excess spending threshold. This year, there is a moratorium on the threshold, so we're not having to look at that, but that is something that as the state works through a new funding system and changes the weighting formula, which some of you may have been following at the state level. That work probably will conclude potentially in this session with a 3 to 5 year kind of phase in. So the impacts of that change and in the current analysis, we were looking at about 700,000 to maybe a 1.4 million impact on our budget in the negative. Again, those numbers are still kind of loose, so I wouldn't bank on those, but that is kind of an initial estimate. So we've got, as we kind of position ourselves looking at this from a visionary standpoint in terms of where ACSD is in regards to our budgeting, I expect that we'll have more clarity at this time next year regarding what the funding formula is and the impact. I think we'll have a lot more clarity in FY25, so that's in 2 years from now. I think we'll be at a place, and we've talked about this, I know the board has talked about this a lot in terms of getting a sense and understanding kind of what the future looks like. I think by FY25, we'll have a much better sense. But at this time, again, next year, that work at the state level should be implemented with a timeline, and we'll have a better sense of how to fund the vision that comes out of the strategic plan for equity, which we are currently engaged in, which will be running through this summer into next fall, hoping to finish that by early winter. So that's our current timeline. So that is going to be a critical piece in looking at how do we fund forward, how do we fund for equity, and the big work. I mentioned this at the beginning in regards to the pandemic and the need to work together. If we're going to fund for equity, we're going to have to make challenging decisions together, and we need to one, as I think a few people mentioned in the meeting prior to this, we need to understand what we mean by equity, and really make sure that we're budgeting for the vision that we create together as a community. So I'm going to now pass it off to Logan, who is physically present in the room there. Logan, are you nearby?
Oh, can you see me? I'm here.
I can't see you. I feel you.
I'm ready.
Take it away.
Right. Thank you. Well, if you'll pull up put a little slideshow together to.
Logan, could you introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, Logan Price, business manager. I put a little slideshow together so that we can all be seeing some of the numbers that I'm talking about. As Will pulls this up, I'll highlight the different pieces of this presentation. I'll start off with budget context, kind of the theme for the year of this year's budget, and then move into the budget summary, which will take us to tax rate. And then finally, this quick discussion of the fund balance.
1 second, you can minimize that the whole way. Far left, yeah, great, thank you.
So briefly, the budget context, kind of the theme for the year. As Peter mentioned, expenditures are scheduled to go up. I wanted to spend the rest of this slide telling the story of that expenditure increase. I think this year's budget can kind of be characterized by a tension between hold for now, kind of maintaining status quo, and do something now, recognize that action is necessary in the face of the challenges that we face. On the hold for now front, the way special ed is funded is changing. The way pupil weighting is done stands to change. Also, and I mentioned this, oh, sorry, if you'll go to I need to go to the next slide. And also hit the button. Thank you. Also, I noted this third factor on the slide here. The spending threshold, which is currently on hold, will return at some point, but we're not sure what that will look like. So this spending threshold is the state's mechanism for restricting spending. So since it's on hold, it doesn't necessarily affect this year's budgeting, but we're aware of the fact that eventually some threshold will exist. And so that will be factored into future budgeting. The point being with how special ed funding is changing, pupil weighting stands to change, a future spending threshold, we're not sure what that'll look like. That all shows us that, hey, there's a lot of flux happening at the state level. Our response to that is taking kind of a wait and see approach, which in terms of budgeting is hold department budgets relatively flat. Let's hold kind of status quo on staffing levels, which, as Peter Burrows mentioned, really means that for the majority of our budget, the main change, everything else kind of held constant means typical salary and budget increases is largely what we're seeing in our budget. Now, I say largely what we're seeing because the other theme of the year is kind of hey, we need to do something in response to the challenges we're facing. One, of course, is the pandemic and the substantial COVID relief money coming from the federal government. We're using a portion of that money to put some staffing in place to respond to the pandemic. Now, that doesn't affect our local budget because that's grant funded, but I think it's an important part of our budget year. There's a lot of federal money coming in with COVID relief, and we're using some of that towards staffing to respond to the pandemic. The more systematic changes responding to challenges we're facing can be seen, and I put MUM's fourth team here, where in order to add a fourth team at MUM's, there's a little bit of increased staffing. There's also some increased demand for some courses at the high school, which will see some slight increases in staffing also. So the point is a little bit of staffing increase, typical salary and benefit increases, and flat department budgets result in a slight increase to our expenditure budget. I was gonna push the button, we'll see if this actually works. All right, yeah. So the expenditure budget is scheduled to go up by 2.5%. Local revenues, as you can see, is actually expected to experience a rather large decrease of 15%. I'll get back to that, but what that means is a larger than 2.5% increase in local spending. So you take local expenditures minus local revenues, gets you to local spending. Local spending, as this slide shows, is the amount to be raised in taxes, which is this 5.2% that Peter mentioned. I mentioned I think I had said I'd get back to the big 15.5% decrease in local revenue. That's a little deceptive. We're budgeting for a little bit less tuition revenue. We're budgeting for a little less special ed revenue, but that only accounts for 5% of the decrease. The other 10% of that decrease in revenue is this $500,000 of prior year surplus that we use to apply to revenues to keep us under the spending threshold. So the point is 2.5% more expenditures, 15.5% decrease or 15.2% decrease in revenues, 5.2% increase in local spending, which is the amount to be raised by local taxes. So that's not the full tax story. That doesn't mean taxes are going up by 5.2%. Two other factors need to get factored in. One is a weighted measure of enrollment called equalized pupils, and the final one is the property yield. So I'll quickly review those. It works and then it doesn't. All right, yes, that's the one. So the first three lines of this slide are the same that we saw on the previous slide. Just two lines have been added. One, equalized pupils. You can see there it goes down, it's 0.8% less. Now, enrollment is expected to be exactly the same next year. So the reason equalized pupils would go down is because highly weighted pupils, such as high schoolers, are being replaced by less highly weighted, lower weighted students, such as elementary students. The point is, less equalized pupils means higher local spending per equalized pupils. You take the local spending number divided by equalized pupils, and you get local spending divided by equalized pupils. This is that 6.1% number that appears on the warning. The last piece of the puzzle here is, and if you'll mind clicking to the next slide, I won't try. The last piece is the property yield, which gets us to our tax rate. So similar to the last slide, the first 5 lines on there you already saw on previous slides. The bottom 2 lines got added. The property yield number, you can see, went up by a rather large 14.3%. This is reflective of the increase in the value of Vermont real estate. You take local spending divided by equalized pupils, that 20,076 number, divide that by the property yield, and that's how you get to the district tax rate. As Peter mentioned, that's down by 9 cents, 5.5%. The story here is, despite increased expenditures, despite lower revenues, despite less equalized pupils, the large increase in the value of in the property yield and the value of Vermont real estate results in a 5.5% decrease in the district tax rate. The last piece here, I say district tax rate because you factor in the common level, you can go to the next slide, factor in the common level of appraisal to see what town tax rates are. So this final slide in the left column, you know, the town, the second column is that $1.55 tax rate that we've been seeing during the presentation. The third is the common level of appraisal, which is a ratio for the value of properties versus the appraised value of those properties. So not surprisingly, as is the case in, I would imagine, all Vermont towns, the appraised value of properties is less than the value. I keep saying value, the property value.
Fair market value.
Fair market value of properties, thank you. Which means the town tax rate is higher than the district tax rate because you divide the district tax rate by the CLA to get the tax rate. So a CLA under 100% means town tax rate is higher than the district tax rate. You can see that all the town tax rates are higher than $1.55. The final column shows the change in the town tax rate relative to the previous year. You can see there that 2 of the towns, Middlebury and Ripton, are scheduled to be 1 cent higher than the previous year, and all the other towns are down a couple at a 10% decrease. This is what Superintendent Burrows is talking about. Most 1% increase, least 10% decrease. The final thing I wanted to mention, and then we can get into questions and comments, is the fund balance. So the prior year surplus of a little over 2.3 million is largely the result of COVID-related cost reduction. This is because less was happening, less than expected was occurring, less travel, less in-person activity, less referees, less tuition, just less. So certainly an unanticipated surplus, if you will. And this surplus is on a warning that's going to propose moving that money into the capital reserve fund. Go to the next slide, please. Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you, Logan, for that presentation. And any comments from the board before we open it up to the voters?
Board member comments?
If not, if you use the Zoom raise your hand feature, we'd be happy to recognize you for a question or comment about the budget presentation that we just heard. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Logan, for making a very complex
Yeah.
process and issue actually make sense. You know, I've sat through these presentations multiple times, and always at the beginning I think, now what is that? And so you did a nice job clarifying all of the mystery pieces. Appreciate that.
Indeed.
Can I make
Yep.
a comment
Yeah.
regarding fund balance? You know, for many years, this district has usually ended up with a positive fund balance. Obviously, that's where you want to end up. This one was particularly large for all the things that Logan talked about. Obviously, you like to have some flexibility in that, and in a $40 or so million budget, you know, the 2% or the 2 million is still relatively low compared to the entire budget expenditure. So just so people don't think we aren't budgeting correctly, because in fact, you want to be on the plus side. There's years where we've had $100,000 in fund balance, and there's other years that we have a number such as this. So.
I guess I have a follow-up question to that. Just expecting for next year's budget, because we have less COVID-related cancellations, we wouldn't expect such a large, just to follow up on Chip's point, we would not expect such a large balance at the end of the year.
Right.
So this is not something that we could get too excited about.
Back to more typical activity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think, if you look back over the last 5 years, we've ended anywhere from, like 1.1. One year we had 150 or so. We've had 700, 600. So it does fluctuate. It can fluctuate pretty significantly based on just, one or two small factors. Obviously, with a large factor like the pandemic last year, we weren't traveling anywhere. We had a lot of expenses normally we would incur that just didn't happen. I expect this year and next year to trend normal, and where that will land, I'm not sure. But I think, given the fact that we've had ESSER funds, and again, those are for additional things, they're not for the things that you normally budget for. So, we're not using ESSER funds or can't use ESSER funds for, current positions, and, to basically fund the budget like it's a fund balance. But it's still helping in some respects. For example, when there's a need, and we have hired a number of student support positions or other positions like that this year, because of the impacts of the pandemic and student need that normally would come out of the general fund, that would be unfunded and would have had an impact on the ending fund balance. So that's where the ESSER funds have helped in terms of where we land at the end of the year.
One other comment on the ESSER funds. In the budget book on page 59, it's broken out under grant funds and summary. So people are wanting to look at those positions and how they impact. It's not done by dollars so much on this, but by the positions that are present, and that they are they're not always temporary. There may be ones that presumably need to be funded, but not by ESSER at some point in the future. But it's broken out there for those people that want to look at that.
Any questions or comments from those who have zoomed in this evening? Yes, Tanya, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here and going over the budget. Actually, I have a comment. I just attended the board meeting prior to this annual meeting, and the board voted on the facilities master plan. There was one item brought up, which was work done in the fall of 2020 around new construction of a 2-section per grade elementary school. It was apparent that most board members were unaware this happened, so I wanted to expand upon it. After the presentation done by Truex Collins in March of 2020, the board agreed on several provisions as we move forward. One was that new construction was not on the table. Another was that 1 and 2 school models were not on the table. And board members agreed that existing facilities would be utilized. These elements were reiterated in March of 2020, May of 2020, and August of 2020 as the work progressed. On September 9th, 2020, David Epstein of Truex Collins presented a spreadsheet to Superintendent Burrows, Chair Cullinane, and Facilities Chair Jetty, outlining the cost of a new 2-section per grade elementary school. And this is contradictory to the messaging throughout the process that this option was not on the table, both in that it includes new construction and that we've only seen this element as part of a 2 elementary school model in which all of the small schools would be closed and replaced with 2 elementary schools. So I'm hoping the individuals that were included in this communication can shed some light on the cost analysis done by Truex Collins and explain why it wasn't shared with the public, why it's not part of the facilities master plan document, and why the board was not aware that this happened. Thank you.
Not on the budget per se, but any comments?
I think throughout the process, we tried to have examples and look at scenarios at both ends of the spectrum. So how much would it cost to keep all of our schools open? What would the cost be if we had one school? They were for discussion purposes when the board decided that we weren't going to move forward with, that it was obvious that it was just part of an exercise that had initiated in an offsite. We didn't move forward with it because we knew the community wasn't going to support it, and it seemed much too much of a leap to take to go from 7 schools to 1 school, because we knew our community valued the experience of small schools. And so it was never something that was on the table, really, except for modeling purposes.
Yeah, and I would just like to, as we continue to go through this process as a community, I hope that we can work really hard to not make inferences. The statement that this board was unaware that characterizes a conversation that just happened is simply not true. And it's inferring things that shouldn't be inferred. As we work together to tackle the real things that Logan and Superintendent Burrs just shared, we're gonna have to enter into these conversations with a better assumption that we're all coming to the table to do good work. That's what we do. That's why we're in public service. That's why Lorraine has dedicated years and years and years of her life that she could have been doing something else. And so we have said repeatedly, that when we started brainstorming as a board, we wanted to look at all the options. Let's throw it all on the table so that we can really have an understanding of what we're considering. From building a brand new school and having all kids there to the other end of that spectrum. And that's what we did, to allow us to debate the issues. Nothing was trying to be hidden. Nothing was trying to be worked into a solution. And so I hope as we move forward as a community, we can do just that. And that's move forward on this important work.
Other comments or questions about the budget for fiscal 23? Anything else? Well, if not, we'll move to the election portion of the warning. And at this point, I would invite anyone who wishes to do so to introduce himself or herself as a candidate for one of the elective offices.
You do have one question.
Oh, we do?
One question.
Oh, I
Perhaps like,
Oh,
that's
Steve.
He's on
Steve.
the rec. Well,
Steve, go ahead.
you're muted, Steve.
How about now?
Good.
Great.
Got it? Okay. Hello, my name is Steve Orzek, and I'm speaking to you today to ask for your vote for ACSD School Board as one of the Middlebury representatives. I would ask you to consider casting your vote for my experience, knowledge, and passion for education. If elected, this will not be my first time on this board. I served on the first ACSD Unified Board until 2019. My previous service on that board included membership on the Finance Committee. In that capacity, I worked with both the business manager and superintendent boroughs and enjoyed those interactions, as well as feeling challenged by both the complexity and responsibility of that role. Since retirement, I have stepped into the middle school to use my experience in education to help alleviate the substitute teacher shortage. I believe this gives me a powerful perspective to bring to the board in the coming years. This hands-on, recent contact with students and educators enhances my training and experience as a classroom teacher. And because of my recent service on the board, I have worked with many of the current board members and look forward to the opportunity to work with them again if elected. And I'm sorry I will not be working with Lorraine. So in my previous service, I found that I both enjoyed this work that I did on the school board and felt that it was a good use of my knowledge in the education area. This knowledge is founded on both formal training as exhibited in my completion of a master's degree in curriculum and instruction from the University of Virginia and 20 years of contract teaching using and refining that knowledge in actual classroom settings. Recently, I've also gained a teacher's eye view of the COVID crisis and the extensive changes that have recently rippled through the middle school, Middlebury Union Middle School, such as the International Baccalaureate, the movement of the 6th grade to the school, the restructuring of the team model, and the leadership changes recently experienced. I know what a teacher faces when walking into a school, as well as what a parent sees when their child comes to that school. During my own child's school years, I served various roles helping at both the school and within the classes themselves. I particularly enjoyed my time in my youngest son's 1st grade class, helping, playing with, organizing, and supervising those curious and exciting little balls of energy. Indeed, it has become clear to me over the years just how much I enjoy much of what is involved in K-12 education. From contract teaching at both middle and high school levels, both in the United States and in Brazil, to leading Boy Scouts and volunteering at the primary level, I have truly discovered that I am passionate about the education of children in this society. And so I have remained in close contact with the ACSD education community at a very grassroots level. Although I have retired from teaching, I would like to continue working in the education field, doing work at the board level. It is my hope that the voters of this district will see fit to return me to this position. In conclusion, I would ask for your vote in light of my experience, knowledge, and passion for education. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak at this forum.
Thank you, Steve. Joanna.
Good evening, ACSD community. My name is Joanna Doria. I am one of the candidates for the Ripton seat on the Consolidated Board. Some of you here might be wondering, given all the news of Ripton withdrawing from the district, how I'm able to actually be a candidate. To help clarify, the State Board of Education ruled that Ripton remain in the Unified District until July 1st, 2023. So until then, we are still a member and still have a seat on the board. I have lived in Ripton for almost 10 years. I worked as a para for the Ripton Elementary School from 2014 to 2018. I am a mother of a 1st grader and a soon-to-be kindergartner. I currently volunteer and substitute teach for the district and believe my time in the classroom, as well as my experience as a parent, will function to inform my work on the board. I have been closely following this board's movements for the last 3 years, and I have a lot I hope to contribute if given the opportunity. I have strong ties to families across our district, and I care deeply about them. In truth, it is specifically with those relationships in mind that I eventually chose to run for the Consolidated Board. My reasons for running for a seat on the ACSD board have to do with a hope to rein in the growing distance between the power at the governance level and the people's voice in our towns. As we know, those voices are the direct link to our students. A thriving governance seeks to incorporate all stakeholders. At this point in time, we are a unified district. I want to revisit the initial reasons why we voted to merge in the first place and make sure they are at the forefront again. Transparency, trust, and hope are all the whys I'm going through this rigorous attempt to serve our district community. Thank you for the time this evening, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Joanna. Chip?
My name's James Malcolm. Lived in Middlebury since 1975. All my children, all our children, went through all grades of Middlebury schools, and they've all come back to Vermont. I served on the UD3 board from 1985 to the year 2000, and chaired that board for 6 years. And we did all the work on the building of the middle school and the major renovations to the high school. That was a challenging time, as this one is too. When unification was Act 46 and unification became possible, I became more interested, having been off the board for 15 years. And I eventually was appointed to an open seat, which was almost the entire 3-year term. Ran last time, and I wish to return now. I'm a big champion of consolidation. I can see how it has made great strides to bring schools together, both in curriculum and in just a sense of being part of the greater community. The challenges of finances, be they small schools or not, is certainly there. We can't eliminate those, and I think I am open to many solutions, however that will be. I do feel that the status quo, has been said many times over these last few years, when we've dealt with all this, cannot continue. We need to find another way to educate our children, both equitably, so that they have equal, not equal experiences, no one has an equal experience, but has an experience which is matched by other children in this same age ranges or otherwise. I've enjoyed working on the school board, both in the past and over these last 5 years. It's been challenging. I've been encouraged by the character of the school board, especially over these last 5 years, although it's not been exactly the same members.
Hold that thought.
Yeah, hold that thought.
I think they can probably.
Can you still hear? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And that has been honestly very rewarding to me, having served on a board for 15 years before, where we did have at times great challenges having a functioning board that was going to be working together. Doesn't mean we always agree or not agree, but it is great having board members that we all can trust, be comfortable with relative to their competence, their pragmatism, and their hoping to seek out the best solutions for the children in our district. So I am running as one of the members in the Middlebury resident nomination, I guess that would be the case, and I would very much like to vote.
Thank you, Jeff.
Unless there's somebody online.
Amy?
Sure. My name's Amy McClain, and I'm running for re-election to the Ripton seat on the ACSD board. I feel called to serve on behalf of all students in ACSD, driven by my commitment to address inequities across our district regarding who has access to educational opportunities and whose educational needs are being met. I bring passion, experience, leadership, integrity, and accountability to my role. I'm a mother of 2 Ripton Elementary School and MUHS graduates, and I've lived in Ripton for 23 years. I served on the Ripton School Board and the ACSU Board from 2008 to 2013. And in that time, I oversaw the study circle process that engaged hundreds of our citizens across our district in every town in meaningful discussions about whether or not to unify into a district. I'm also the ACSD representative on the Middlebury Community TV Board, and that's actually a lot of fun. My academic credentials in my entire 35+ years of my professional career have been exclusively in education, both pre-K to 12 and higher ed. And in fact, I also teach a project-based course, a winter term course at Middlebury College called The Future of Vermont Public Schools. I ran for the Ripton seat 3 years ago, knowing that as a district, we are facing huge, complex challenges. I wanted to engage in a problem-solving process with integrity, transparency, and robust community engagement. For me, the primary responsibility of the board is to plan for and manage our assets and resources
that best meet the needs of all our students, making certain that all students feel welcome, supported, and successful is a top priority. By several measures, our socioeconomically disadvantaged, special education, and students of color are not performing as well as their counterparts, while our educational resources and programming are unevenly distributed across the district. I feel morally obligated to act. At the same time, we face reduced enrollment, increased fixed costs, as Logan illustrated, and vastly increased student needs. The status quo is not sustainable, and doing nothing is not an option. We face very challenging decisions regarding the future of our district, and it's essential that the board engage our educational community and help members understand the reasoning and the results we hope to achieve. If I'm reelected, I pledge to collaborate with all of our stakeholders in building our future, particularly in how we cultivate a deep sense of belonging throughout our educational community, however we redefine it, and uphold the unique strengths of each of our member towns. 7 years ago, our towns unified into a single district so that we could address these challenges together. I remain committed to that work of collaborative problem solving. I vow to work on behalf of all our students and our families across the district, especially our most vulnerable, and would be honored to serve for the 16 months Ripton remains part of ACSD. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Jamie, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. Hello, neighbors and friends, and thank you to the board, the administration for hosting this event. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you and discuss these issues with the other candidates. I'm Jamie McCallum. I have a son at Weybridge School. I've taught sociology at Middlebury College for the last decade. I'm also a volunteer firefighter on the Weybridge crew. Years ago, my family moved from Middlebury to Weybridge. It's the experience of a community-connected school that drove my interest in school board issues. And I'm running for a seat so I can contribute to a board that is more responsive and accountable to the communities it represents all across the district. Kids and teachers are stressed to the breaking point, and they need the stability of their schools to succeed. Scholarly research shows that students achieve better outcomes when parents and teachers and administrators can easily work together. That environment can also ensure that students from rural, low-income families get the attention they need. I believe we have important priorities to focus on to support those schools. And if elected, I hope to encourage a shift from facilities towards centering the educational needs of all our varied schools, no matter where they're located in the district. This means prioritizing the emotional and mental well-being of students, teachers, and families as we recover from the pandemic. I respect my board member service, but we've seen what happens when we move too fast. More students, fewer teachers, and ignoring the voices of caution, as happened at MUMS, is just a smaller version of the larger consolidation plan. We have serious budget issues, and yes, we must be fiscally responsible. Right now, however, the process to face those challenges has eroded some trust between the board and our towns. I would like to help rebuild it by bringing diverse community voices back into the conversation. When I talk to parents and teachers in the outlying towns and Middlebury as well, we all want the same thing: vibrant schools that are rooted in the communities where we live and work. But a one-size-fits-all model is incompatible with the curricular diversity of our district that makes Vermont schools so special. I'm running because I believe that in a unified district, we should stand up for each and every school, and we can expand equity if we lead by listening to what they want and need. As an educator for the last 18 years, I'm a seasoned advocate for students, teachers, and staff, and I hope for the chance to join the board to expand this commitment. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you, Jamie. Mary.
Hi, my name is Mary Cullinane. I have been the chair of the school board for the past 4 years and on the school board for the past 6 years. I have to say, my decision to run again was a hard one to make. I believe there are two places where politics shouldn't exist: school boards and the Supreme Court. And I think that at the end of the day, over the past few years, we have started to allow politics to enter into our debates. And I think that does a disservice to the concept of education. I started teaching when I was 18 years old. I taught seniors when I was 22 years old, and I taught seniors in high school who were 18. It was an amazing experience, and I did that for 10 years. And we had students our schools were around the 85% on free and reduced lunch. They were incredibly, incredibly challenged. And then for the next more decades than I want to admit, I went into the public sector and worked for companies that were trying to contribute to the teaching and learning process. This has been the only thing I've ever really thought about. Every time when I look back and decide, why did I come to Vermont? It was for one reason and one reason only. And that was because I wanted a community. And that's what I found here. I found people who are willing to step up. I find people who understand that voice matters. I find people who truly care for the individuals that they encounter every day, regardless of the depth of their knowledge of that person. That is an amazing attribute. And what's so fantastic is that everybody seems to agree we have a great district. For the past 3 years, I have gone around to every single school and talked with folks from every single community, and day in and day out, I hear people arguing for their schools because they're amazing. That is a great problem for us to have. This is about the next few years, how we can figure out a way so that every kid who walks through a door, regardless of where that door is, has an experience that will allow them to be successful. And that is going to take resources. So it's our job as a board to ensure that we have access to the necessary resources so that our kids can be successful. And that's what this is about. And it shouldn't matter that we have different size schools or that we have different resources available, but the fact of the matter is that our costs are going up, our needs are increasing, and we're gonna have to figure out a way to solve for that. This isn't about taking away. This is about how do we ensure we can provide as much as possible to everyone. That's what we're trying to solve for. So I'm running because I think there's still a lot of work to do. I'm running because the group of people who are involved in this process on this board have demonstrated to me nothing but integrity and nothing but transparency and nothing but a commitment to our community. And I'm going to work my darndest over the next 3 years to ensure that we keep politics out of this and we put kids first. And that's why I'm asking for your vote. I want to thank everybody who's been willing to step up, candidates, community members, people willing to fight for their voice. And I want to thank this community for doing it in an incredibly respectful way. Because you can look across television stations, across internet sites, and across this country, and many districts are challenged to even do that. And we have not been. And that once again speaks to the strength that we have as a community. And we're going to get through it. And so I just ask that we do it together. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mary. Anyone else? Any other questions or comments from the Zoomers?
There's one question I think may go back a little bit, should I?
Okay.
Check on that. There's one at the bottom here.
Oh.
That's for Peter. Peter, can you see the Q&A? You're on mute. Could you speak into the timeline with regards to the strategic plan for equity and how you see that timeline corresponding to the answer to that question?
Sure. So right now, the advisory committee, they met in November, December, kicked off the work. They are now, and for further information, you can go onto our website under strategic plan, and there's a list of all the members on our strategic plan advisory committee. and more information around the process. So they are now in the collecting data portion. The plan as a whole can't move forward until we really get a sense of where our community is, and that's why the advisory committee recently sent out an equity audit, and they're collecting that. We've also sent all of our kind of student assessment data to be reviewed and analyzed, and we'll be getting that back within the next month, I believe. We are also, the advisory committee in their next meeting are going to be working on community outreach, looking at different ways to reach those voices that we don't tend to hear from as much. That is a central part of this process, is not doing our normal thing where we have a couple forums and the same people tend to come to those forums, and those are important, but we also want to think a little bit differently around how we reach everyone. So that is something that the advisory committee is very committed to. At the end of this spring, after the collection of data has occurred and we've really kind of looked at our community as a whole and heard from our community, then the board, the advisory committee, will be handing off all of that work to the board. The board will be working on a theory of action, and that will drive the work, really the strategic planning work coming in the fall, where we'll be looking at, now we have a vision, now we know where we want to go. So what does that mean in terms of the work? And that's when we'll be building the objectives and the foundational goals for the plan, which will be bringing us to, probably December.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Any other questions or comments? Brian Bauer?
You keep coming and going.
Oh, okay. Well,
We'll let Ruth Bernstein.
Ruth. Ruth, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I was just wondering if pandemic bonuses were considered for frontline school workers, perhaps with the ARPA money?
Peter?
Do you want me to answer that?
Sure.
So we haven't yet taken that up. We have this year we did, kind of essentially, I'm not sure it would be called a bonus, but at Thanksgiving break week, we did have 2 days that were, essentially paid PD days that people use for wellness and kind of personal recovery. So that is something that we did kind of in the same vein as what you're talking about.
Laura?
Good evening. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, especially about the complex budget. I think that was extremely well executed. I want us to keep in mind climate change. Tomorrow there's a gathering in Montpelier to address the urgency of this, and I didn't hear it mentioned too much in tonight's presentation, and I just want us to really keep that forward in mind as we're doing our work together. So it's just a general encouragement, especially with regard to how our buildings are heated and how we transport ourselves. Those are the two drivers, in terms of climate change. So let's keep looking at that and not be afraid to take radical action, because we'll need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Brian?
Can you hear me now?
You can.
Okay. Yes, I do have some good information for all of you and for the people who are listening and viewing on Zoom. I am Brian Bauer, and I am running for a seat on the Addison Central School District Board as a representative from Middlebury. My interest in education started with me being a student in Chicago. It developed and became more focused when I started teaching high school chemistry and physics in Connecticut. The beauty of Vermont drew me and my family to Middlebury in 1969, where I taught physical and life sciences to 7th and 8th graders for 32 years. I earned a Bachelor of Science in Education from the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, a Master of Science in Education from Antioch College, Yellow Springs, Ohio, and a 6-year Certificate of Education in Business Administration from the University of Vermont. My wife and I raised our 3 children in Middlebury, all of whom attended the Middlebury schools K through 12 and are very successful. I have served the community over the years as chair of the zoning board, a justice of the peace, a member of the tax abatement board, and the board of civil authority. For several summers, I was an auxiliary state police officer working on the local lakes to promote water safety. When I retired from MUMS, I became a realtor to continue my interest in property management and development. Currently, I drive a school bus to take area students to extracurricular events. This allows me to interact with students in many grades from several schools. I also continue my love of outdoor education. Some of you may know about the trips that I took kids on into the Adirondacks in the winter. And I continue running in both the Green Mountains and the Adirondacks. As I consider education, it becomes clear to me that among the many goals must be the teaching of effective problem solving with the necessary knowledge, skills, and processing ability. Integrated in this is the promotion of personal responsibility and respect for others. I am particularly interested in assuring that each student obtain the foundation they will need upon graduation, whether or not they continue their formal education. To that end, a good work ethic needs to be developed in these students. With my diverse background, I would like to serve on the ACSD school board to help wherever I can to make the system run as smoothly and efficiently as possible. I know there are many issues to be addressed, and they are complex. I will study each situation to learn as much as possible to make the best informed decisions for the students of the Central District and for their tax-paying supporters. I would appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
We have one more question in the Q&A here.
Okay. Okay, well.
Okay, I guess we're good.
Well, anything else from anyone? If not, I want to thank our Zoom Meister, Will Hatch, for helping facilitate our meeting tonight. We hope this is the last year we'll have to call on you to do this. Thanks to Logan Price for his presentation and Superintendent Burrows for his leadership, and to all the directors for their hard work on behalf of our community. Our hearing is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Moderator.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.